Three boys in worn hoodies stood by the school gates, quietly sketching in the dirt, while parents walked past them without a glance. Minutes later, that same trio was seen kneeling beside a millionaire's daughter, teaching her, not with words, but with hand signs and eyes full of patience. The staff tried to intervene, but the girl, she smiled, for the first time, and that wasn't the strangest part. If you believe healing doesn't always come from titles or money, but from those who've been ignored the most, stay with us, subscribe, or leave a thought if this story reaches somewhere quiet in you. Greenfield Park in suburban San Francisco was the kind of place parents brought their kids when they'd run out of answers. At least, that's how it felt to Jack Thompson that Sunday morning. The grass was clipped short, the benches evenly spaced, and the sounds of children filled the air, except for the space where Jack and Lily sat. His 6-year-old daughter hadn't spoken in 8 months, not a whisper, not even a hum. She had slipped away from language slowly, like a tide pulling back from shore, and no one, not the finest specialists in the Bay Area, could explain why. Jack sat with his elbows on his knees, watching. Lily crouched on a blanket nearby, hands busy with a brittle leaf. Her face, pale and distant, gave no clue she even noticed the other children playing tag or the golden retriever chasing its tail just yards away. She seemed locked somewhere else. Jessica, her caretaker, sat at a respectful distance, reading quietly. Jack had insisted on space, on order, on quiet. Then something shifted. Jack heard it before he saw it, a soft, breathy sound, almost a syllable. He turned sharply. Lily had tilted her head toward 3 boys who had wandered close. They were clearly not from this part of town. One was barefoot. Another wore a shirt 2 sizes too big, knotted at the waist. They didn't shout or laugh like the others. Instead, one boy crouched in front of Lily and, with a stick, began tracing letters into the dirt. The younger ones watched with solemn focus, not mocking or teasing. Jack stood. He didn't hesitate. He moved in fast, grabbing Lily by the arm not roughly, but firm. "What are you doing?" he barked at the boys. "Get away from her." The boys froze. One looked like he might say something but thought better of it. They scattered without a word. Jessica stood too, caught between instinct and caution. "Jack," she said gently. "I think she was." He didn't let her finish. "You're here to protect her, Jessica, not let her get swarmed by strangers." "They weren't. You're done," Jack said. He didn't raise his voice, but the words cut clean. Jessica's mouth opened, then closed. She gathered her bag and left without a scene. That evening, back at the Forest Hills estate, Jack stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows in his study. Lily sat behind him on the carpet, stacking blocks silently. His tablet screen displayed notes from Dr. Hanley, the latest neurodevelopmental specialist. Nothing definitive. Again. He clicked open the home security app and scrolled back through the park footage. There it was. Lily, facing the barefoot boy. Her head tilted, her lips moved. He leaned in, hit replay. There it was again, a sound. No mistaking it. A breathy consonant, maybe a vowel. Jack stared at the frame. She had reached out toward the boy, her fingers extended, not random, not flailing. A gesture of connection. He dropped the tablet onto the desk. The screen went black. In the hallway, the lights flicked on automatically as the house dimmed for the night, but Jack remained still, eyes fixed on the image still playing in his mind. She hadn't spoken in months, but in that moment, she had tried, not to him, not to her therapist, to a barefoot stranger with a stick and dirt for a chalkboard. She didn't look back, but he knew something had shifted. The morning light leaked through the bent blinds of apartment 1C at Sunset Grove Housing. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of heating oil and instant oatmeal. Ethan, 11, sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, flipping through a water-stained library book on American Sign Language. His brothers, Mason and Leo, sat nearby, making a quiet game out of matching hand shapes from the book to each other's names. The room was small, the kind where everything overlapped: sleep, meals, school, and silence. Their grandmother, Nora Rivera, moved slowly from the kitchenette, one hand pressed against her hip, the other balancing a chipped mug of tea. She'd been a nurse assistant at St. Paul's Public Hospital before budget cuts made her disposable. Now she watched over the boys like a hawk, even when her joints screamed with every step. She placed the mug on the table beside Ethan and said nothing. She didn't need to. The tension in his shoulders was enough. He finally looked up. Her name's Lily. He said she didn't say anything, but I think she was trying. Nora sat beside him, easing down into the couch that sagged in the middle. She, the girl at the park yesterday, she asked. Ethan nodded. She looked like she wanted to speak. I traced an L in the dirt. She made a sound. Nora stirred her tea with a spoon that didn't quite match the cup. And the man, her dad, Jack Thompson, Ethan said, the name tasting strange in his mouth. I've seen him on the news. Tech company, big houses, big words. Nora raised an eyebrow. And he let you help. Ethan hesitated. He told us to go, pulled her away like we were dangerous. Nora leaned back. Well, maybe he was scared. Rich people are. Sometimes they have a lot to lose, and no idea how to hold on to what matters. Ethan looked down at his hands, then quietly shaped the sign for friend. Across the city, the Forest Hills estate stood high above the noise. Jack Thompson sat in his study, surrounded by soft leather and hard silence. On his desk lay a stack of unopened mail from therapists, speech specialists, and early intervention consultants. A cup of coffee had gone cold. He hadn't touched it. He opened his laptop, clicked on Jessica's contact, hovered, closed the window. Then he opened the security footage again. The timestamp showed 10:42 The frame was off-center, capturing Lily from the side, crouched on the grass. 3 boys were in view. 1 drew in the dirt. Jack slowed the footage. Lily's eyes tracked the stick. Her mouth opened slightly. A sound barely perceptible, but real, escaped her lips. Then came the moment he hadn't noticed in real time. Her hand lifted toward the boy. Jack leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. He watched it again. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked alone to the library 2 blocks away, the book on sign language tucked under his arm. The woman behind the desk smiled when she saw him. Back again. Huh. Ethan shrugged. I didn't finish learning the alphabet. He found a table near the back and opened to the page on emotional vocabulary. Words like trust, afraid, listen. He tried the signs one by one, shaping them with quiet hands. Nora was waiting when he got back. You going back there? She asked. Not accusing, just curious. If I see her again, Ethan said, maybe I won't wait this time. Nora nodded, her voice soft. Not every kid gets to teach something grown-ups forgot. In Forest Hills. The sun dipped below the skyline. Jack sat on the edge of Lily's bed, watching her sleep. Her breathing was steady, her hands curled into fists beneath the covers. He touched her forehead, then stood. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. An email. No subject. No sender. Just a single sentence in the body. What if you were wrong? Mr. Thompson. Jack read it twice, then again. He didn't know why. It felt less like a question and more like a mirror being held up. He didn't delete it. He left it open, the screen glowing in the dark, like something waiting to be answered. The lobby of Orion Tech's downtown headquarters buzzed with polite conversation and the clink of catered cutlery. Polished concrete floors stretched beneath glass walls, and banners reading "Innovation for Every Mind" hung from sleek chrome fixtures. Jack Thompson stood near the front of the conference hall, hands clasped lightly in front of him, listening to the event coordinator recap the guest list. His keynote was done. The applause had been generous, the investors satisfied, and the education directors polite. But something about the entire morning felt heavier than it should. He had come to speak about future-forward learning tools for children with developmental delays. Graphs, projections, and early-phase AI simulations were the language of the day. But Lily's silence still echoed louder than anything on the screen. He'd left her at home with a new therapist. Another one. A better one, supposedly. Mr. Thompson, the coordinator said, touching his sleeve. There's someone you should meet, a local nonprofit director working with East Bay schools. She's been making some waves in applied empathy programs. Jack nodded, followed. The woman standing near the exhibit panel was short, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose knot. Her hands, though still, had the posture of someone used to guiding others. Beside her stood a boy skinny, in a button-down shirt with one cuff unbuttoned. A canvas backpack rested awkwardly on his shoulders. Jack's gaze flicked from the woman to the boy, and then paused. She offered a hand. Nora Rivera. This is my grandson, Ethan. Jack extended his hand, but something caught in his chest. He'd seen that face. Dirt-smudged, barefoot, crouched beside his daughter. He didn't say a word. Nora's voice didn't shift. He told me he once communicated with a little girl at Greenfield Park. She didn't speak, but she looked straight at him when he wrote her name in the dirt. Jack looked down at the boy again. Ethan was standing still but not timid. His hands were in his pockets, eyes steady. She smiled, Ethan said softly. Jack's reply was delayed. She's doing okay. She still doesn't talk, Ethan asked. The question came so simply, like someone asking if it might rain. She's trying, Jack said. Nora watched him for a moment, then said, We don't have degrees or devices, but sometimes listening is enough. That evening, traffic moved slow along Fell Street as Jack's driver took him home. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't look at his phone. Instead, he stared out the window, playing the conversation over again. Ethan had called her Lily. Not that girl or your daughter, just Lily. No one outside the family ever used her name. Even her therapists mostly referred to her by file ID. When he got home, he walked past the living room, where Lily sat cross-legged, stacking tiles. She didn't look up. He paused by the door, hand hovering at the frame. Later that night, alone in his office, Jack pulled up the old footage again. The same angle, the same park. He zoomed in, this time slowing it further. There was Ethan again, kneeling in the grass. He drew a shape, paused, then another, an L, then an I. Lily leaned forward slightly. She reached out. Her mouth moved, and then, clear as breath against glass, she smiled. Just for a moment, he had missed it the first time. Too focused on control, too busy shielding her from things he didn't understand. Jack rewound the footage, played it again. This time, he didn't blink. She hadn't looked back. But he knew. Something had changed. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet Jack used to equate with control, with order. But lately, it felt more like absence, like something had slipped through and left behind an echo. He stood in his study, the room dim except for a single lamp on the desk. Shadows stretched long across the oak floor. Lily was already asleep. No new words. Just the same soft hum she made when the lights dimmed. A sound that always felt more like habit than hope. Jack opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet he hadn't touched in months. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. He slid out a folder labeled Orion Tech HR Case, 2016 Clark, Helen. He remembered the day too well. A conference room filled with tension and silence. A woman in her early 30s, eyes too tired for her age, standing across from a panel that didn't know what to do with what she'd said. Her complaint had been clear. A senior engineer repeated inappropriate behavior, dismissed in jokes, brushed off by HR until she made it formal. Jack had been called to vote as part of the executive board. He hadn't known her personally, had read the notes, listened to the arguments, weighed the consequences, then cast a neutral vote. He told himself at the time that neutrality was fairness, that letting the process decide was wiser than stepping in emotionally. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Resignation, on paper. In reality, burnout, dismissal, erasure. He hadn't thought of Helen Clark since then, until her son wrote his daughter's name in dirt and made her smile. Jack flipped through the documents, HR memos, internal replies, Helen's original statement, concise and restrained. Then, stapled to the back, A single line from her exit interview, "I'm not leaving because I lost. I'm leaving because I won't raise my children in a place where silence is a survival tactic." His fingers curled around the edge of the page. It was dated 3 days before her final paycheck cleared. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Outside, wind stirred the hedges against the windows. Somewhere in the house, the heater clicked on with a metallic thump. He sat still for minutes, maybe more, before standing and walking to the other cabinet. From it, he pulled another file, Lily Thompson's speech regression logs. The difference between the two folders was stark. One was thin, a footnote. The other was thick with reports, tests, transcripts from world-renowned experts. But both, now, felt incomplete. He opened Lily's folder and pulled out the most recent therapist report. Lily remains nonverbal, no significant progress, recommending additional neurological mapping. Jack closed the file, then reopened Helen's. There was a photo clipped to the back. Helen at an employee event, smiling in the way people do when they're trying to seem unfazed. And behind her, blurred but familiar, was someone else, Jessica. Back then, just an intern. Jack hadn't noticed that before. The hallway creaked behind him. He turned, half expecting Lily to be standing there. No one, just the night. Jack returned to the desk, took a deep breath, and pulled a notepad from the drawer. On it was an old address, one he remembered Helen had used when she still worked at Orion Tech, Sunset Grove Housing. He stared at it for a long while, then tore the page out, folded it in half, held it, then slowly. He dropped it into the drawer and slid it shut, not locked, just closed. He didn't know if it was too late, but he finally knew where silence had started and what it had cost. Sunset Grove hadn't changed much in the years since Jack last saw it from a distance, from a document, from the silence following Helen Clark's departure. He had never stepped foot in the housing complex itself, never needed to. But now, parked along the cracked curb, his Mercedes looked like a foreign visitor, too clean, too quiet for a place where windows stuck in their frames and front doors carried their own language in chipped paint and makeshift locks. He stepped out, carrying a small white box in one hand. Baked goods from a boutique shop in Nob Hill, the kind with hand-tied ribbons and small labels that listed the origin of the butter. It wasn't an offering, exactly, but it felt better than arriving with empty hands. The building's hallway smelled of cooking oil and laundry detergent. He walked slowly, as if the air here was thicker. At apartment 1C, he raised his hand to knock, but the door opened before he touched it. Nora Rivera stood there, eyes calm but uninviting. "Mr. Thompson," she said, not surprised. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You are," she replied evenly, then stepped aside. "But come in anyway, inside." The apartment was modest, cramped, but tidy. A floor fan hummed in the corner. School supplies were stacked in crates beneath the table. Ethan appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his jeans. He was barefoot, same quiet eyes, same posture that belonged more to a grown man than a boy. Jack held up the box. "I brought pastries. From..." He stopped. The name didn't matter. Nora nodded once. "Put them there." Jack placed the box on the counter and turned to Ethan. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to spend a little time with Lily again. She's more comfortable around you than anyone I've seen." Ethan glanced at his grandmother, then back at Jack. "I'm not trained. I'm not a doctor or anything. I know that. I saw something in her eyes. She wasn't scared." Jack looked down at his shoes. "She hasn't smiled since the fever. Not once." Ethan didn't speak for a moment. "Then I don't want money." Jack's eyes rose. "That's not why I'm here. I just want to help," Ethan added. A silence settled. Jack's gaze wandered the apartment. His eyes landed on a photograph above the bookshelf, slightly faded, in a wooden frame. A young woman, dark-haired, eyes focused, smile measured. Not the kind of smile that tries to win anyone. Just one that says, "I'm here, and I'm trying." "She's your mother," Jack said, voice low. "Yes." Nora answered instead. "Helen Clark. She worked for Orion Tech. You already know that." Jack looked at Nora. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired. I didn't fire her, he said, more to himself than to them. I didn't protect her either. She never expected protection. Nora replied. She expected someone to notice. Ethan looked confused. He turned to his grandmother, then back to Jack. What happened? It was a long time ago, Jack said, careful, but it was wrong, and I'm sorry for what it did to your family. Ethan frowned slightly, absorbing the words like someone who doesn't yet know what they're supposed to mean. I didn't know about that, he said slowly, but I still want to help Lily. Not because of what you did, because she's worth helping. Jack nodded. She is. Nora stepped closer, placing a hand on her grandson's shoulder. We don't hold debts here, she said quietly. Only choices. Jack stood for a moment, unsure if he should speak again. Instead, he reached for his phone and typed a short message to his assistant, prepare Lily's therapy room. Bring Jessica back. Ethan watched him. I don't need thanks. Mr. Thompson, he said. I just want her to laugh again. Jack turned toward the door. I'll have someone pick you up tomorrow. Nora didn't follow him out, but as the door clicked shut behind him, she looked at Ethan and said softly, Your mother would have liked what you just said. And for the first time that day, Ethan smiled small, quiet, but real. The therapy room at Forest Hills had always been sterile. Before today, its walls wore only the blandness of pastel blue and framed certificates. The table was smooth and untouched. The shelves held puzzles and sensory tools no child had ever chosen willingly. It was a space designed by consultants and therapists and optimized for results, yet it had never once drawn a sound from Lily. But this morning, everything looked different. Colored paper fluttered on the walls, taped into sloppy, joyful patterns. Alphabet letters cut from glitter cardstock looped around the room like carnival banners. A helium balloon shaped like a dinosaur bobbed near the ceiling fan, its string tied to a crayon cup. Jack had watched quietly as Jessica and a few Orion Tech staff helped Ethan and his brothers set it all up. Leo brought a bucket of foam letters. Mason arranged sticker sheets on low stools, and Ethan steady. Calm placed a folded blanket in the middle of the room. Not a mat, a blanket, soft, lived in. Something Lily had seen before. Jessica stepped into the doorway. Her voice was low, almost hesitant. It's been 3 weeks, she said. Jack looked up from the hallway, nodding once. Thank you for coming back. She didn't ask why now. She didn't mention how abruptly she'd been dismissed or how she'd left Lily in tears that morning at the park. She only walked in, saw the boys, and crouched beside the bin of animal figurines. She whispered, Where do we begin? Ethan turned from the wall where he had taped a drawing, a crude but colorful version of Greenfield Park. We don't begin, he said simply. We just sit. Lily entered last. She paused at the threshold, fingers wrapped around the seam of her shirt. Jack stood just behind her, but he didn't speak, didn't coax. He let her choose. She stepped in slowly, eyes scanning the walls. She noticed the balloon first, then the stack of drawings. Her fingers twitched. Ethan didn't approach. He didn't call her name. He sat on the floor, legs crossed, and began drawing. Nothing special, just loops, shapes, slow lines. Leo lay beside him and started clapping rhythmically. Mason opened a sticker sheet and held one up silently, a small orange cat with a tilted head. Jessica watched from the corner. Jack stood still by the doorway, hands behind his back. Lily tilted her head. She moved closer. Mason extended the sticker. She looked at it, blinked, and then so softly it might have been imagined said, Meow. Time cracked open. Jessica gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Ethan's head shot up, eyes wide. Leo stopped clapping. Mason froze with the next sticker half peeled. For a second, no one spoke, not even Jack. Then the room erupted. Jessica let out a sob she hadn't meant to release. Ethan beamed so wide it shifted his whole posture. Leo clapped again, this time louder. Mason held up the sticker like a trophy. Lily's mouth remained parted, curious. She looked at them, really looked, then turned to Ethan and moved closer. 1 step, 2. Jack didn't move, but his hands, clenched at his sides, slowly released. Lily crouched beside Ethan. She didn't speak again. Not yet, but she reached for the crayon in his hand. Instead of taking it, she touched his fingers just once, then left her hand there. Ethan didn't flinch. He nodded, as if she had just said something clear. Jessica wiped her cheeks, voice breaking slightly. Do you think this happened because of them? Not training, not methods. Just... Jack didn't answer. He looked at his daughter, her small hand now resting in the boy's. He looked at Ethan not with suspicion, not as a stranger, but as something else, someone else. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The sunlight over Forest Hills was softer now, as if it, too, had learned to lower its voice. Within the estate, Lily's laughter echoed faintly down the hallway, a choppy sound, still unsure of itself, but real. It had happened that morning, when Leo tripped over a plush dinosaur and declared it the enemy. She laughed, not loud, but enough to freeze everyone in the room. News, of course, traveled fast, especially when it wasn't meant to. It started with the housekeeper, Mrs. Eldridge, who had worked for the Thompsons since Lily was born. She didn't mean any harm, really, but over coffee in the staff quarters, her words dropped casually. Mr. Thompson invited 3 street kids to teach Lily. Not doctors, not specialists, kids. By the afternoon, the story had reached the Orion Tech break rooms. Experimental therapy, some whispered. Desperation, said others. A few scoffed, murmuring about how grief could blur judgment, even for men like Jack. But one person didn't join in. Brian, Jack's driver, smiled quietly when someone asked about it. I've seen that girl cry, more times than I can count. He said, Today, I saw her chase a balloon. He didn't elaborate, just left it there, like a seed that would grow when it needed to. That evening, Jack drove the boys back to Sunset Grove himself. No assistant, no chauffeur, just the 4 of them in his SUV, the interior too new, too polished for boys with scraped elbows and hand-me-down shoes. Leo fell asleep first, leaning against Mason. Mason stared out the window, fingers tracing shapes on the fogged glass. Ethan sat in the front passenger seat, quiet. Jack kept his hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, but when they stopped at a red light near Ashbury, Ethan spoke. Do people know I'm helping? Jack didn't turn his head. No, he said simply. Ethan glanced over. Why not? Jack inhaled once through his nose. Because I'm not sure people would understand. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I don't want them to know either. I don't want to be on camera. I don't want anyone asking questions. Jack looked at the boy in the side mirror. The streetlight cast his reflection just enough to catch his expression wary, firm, but not bitter. You don't want credit? Jack asked. No, I just want Lily to talk again. The car rolled forward in silence, past the liquor store, past the gas station where the sign was missing a bulb. The world outside returned to its usual hum, but something in the car had shifted. When they reached Sunset Grove, Jack parked and didn't speak right away. Ethan waited, then gently shook Leo awake while Mason unbuckled his seatbelt. Jack leaned over slightly. You were good with her today. Ethan didn't smile. She was good with me. Jack nodded. Same thing, isn't it? Ethan stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. Jack stayed a moment longer, watching the 3 boys walk toward their building. Nora opened the door, her silhouette framed in yellow hallway light. That night, as Jack sat in his study, he reread an internal memo from the Orion Tech communications team. A new event had been scheduled, Technology for Community Learning, featuring key partners and initiatives tied to inclusive education. Someone had added a note in the margin, consider involving the Thompson Foundation, highlight local success story if available. The next morning, Ethan found a letter taped to the inside of their apartment door, plain white envelope. His name in careful handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside was a formal invitation. Orion Tech cordially requested his presence at the event as a guest contributor to a private panel on community-driven innovation in education. He stared at it for a long time, then looked over at Leo and Mason, who were still finishing their cereal, and without saying a word, he folded the letter in half and placed it under his pillow. The ballroom at the Four Seasons in downtown San Francisco shimmered under rows of crystal chandeliers. The stage had been dressed in clean white fabric, sleek spotlights angled just right to create a modern halo behind each speaker. Logos rotated gently on the screen. A banner read, "Technology for Human Connection." Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his borrowed shirt. The sleeves were a bit too long, the collar slightly stiff. Brian had ironed it that morning and lent him a navy vest that once fit his own son, now grown. Nora had combed Ethan's hair 3 times, each time with quieter hands. Mason and Leo, dressed in matching khakis and sweaters, sat 2 rows back with the children of other attendees, executive families, board members, donors. Jack had introduced the panel, calm and steady behind the podium. His voice, filtered through the soft echo of the microphone, sounded more personal than promotional. "We've been told for decades that only data, diagnostics, and standardized training can reach children who live in silence," he said. "But what if it isn't about precision?" He paused, then looked directly at the row where Ethan sat. 3 boys showed me something different. They didn't come from universities or clinical programs. They came from a part of the city we don't put on brochures. And yet, my daughter smiled. She said, "Meow." She took someone's hand. They didn't give her a lesson. They gave her patience. The room was still, the kind of stillness that follows the unexpected. "I speak tonight as a CEO," Jack continued, "but also as a father. And I'll tell you this, if there's one thing no school ever taught me, it's how to listen without trying to fix. Some clapped, some didn't." Jack stepped off stage, straight into a narrow hallway lined with sponsor banners. The light was dimmer here, quieter. Before he could reach the green room, a tall man with salt gray hair, one of the early Orion Tech investors, grabbed his arm. "Jack," the man said, keeping his voice low, "you're really putting street kids on a pedestal now. That's what you want." The press to see. Jack looked at him but didn't answer. Ethan had been nearby, sipping juice, unnoticed in the corner. He didn't flinch, but something in his face dimmed. He turned slowly, slipped away before either adult could see. Outside, near the garden patio, Lily played under the maple trees. Jessica sat on the edge of a bench, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to let her feel independent. When Lily saw Ethan approaching, her face lit up. She lifted one hand shaky, unsure, but it waved. He smiled, but his steps slowed. He wasn't sure he belonged here. Not in these shoes, not in this garden trimmed by money, not under this soft music, or beside kids who hadn't skipped meals. He stared at the ground, then felt a hand settle gently on his shoulder. It was Jack. "You don't have to hear them," Jack said quietly. Ethan didn't move. "Because you're the only one who's really been hearing her." Jack's tone wasn't grand. It wasn't fatherly. It wasn't anything Ethan had expected. Just still and steady. Lily giggled from across the path. She'd picked up a fallen leaf and pressed it against her cheek. Jessica clapped softly. Mason called out, "That's her tickly face." Ethan exhaled, slowly. From the far side of the lawn, a woman in her late 60s stood watching. Elegant scarf, firm jaw, eyes that didn't blink much. She walked with quiet confidence. Her name tag read, Miriam Harper, Orion Tech Board of Governors. She leaned toward one of her assistants. "That boy, with the vest." "Yes, ma'am." One of the guest contributors. Her eyes narrowed. "Rivera, is he Helen Clark's boy?" She didn't wait for the answer. The highway shimmered with headlights as Jack drove through the night, the engine humming low. Ethan sat in silence beside him, arms crossed loosely over his vest. eyes fixed on the moving blur of taillights. Neither had said a word since leaving the event. The music was off. The air felt thick with something neither of them had named. Jack's mind wasn't in the car. It was circling around one sentence. Is he Helen Clark's boy? That name hadn't passed his lips in years. And yet, tonight, it had surfaced with a sharpness that made his hands tighten around the wheel. He glanced at Ethan, still quiet, still unreadable, and felt something like fear settle under his ribs. Back at the Forest Hills house, after Ethan and his brothers had been dropped off, Jack went straight to his office. He didn't even loosen his tie. The room, dimly lit and lined with polished shelves, hadn't changed in years, but the drawer he opened tonight had dust on its lock. Inside, buried beneath annual reports and tech presentations, was a slim folder with Helen Clark's name printed in black ink. He sat down, clicked open the old Orion Tech personnel database. Her email still existed in the archive. So did her complaint, a 6-paragraph report detailing inappropriate conduct by a senior supervisor, ignored warnings, lack of HR response. Then came the thread. Dozens of internal replies, vague, clinical, strategic. And there his name, Jack Thompson, senior vice president at the time. His response, noted. No defense, no protest. Just that. Further down, in her resignation letter, a single line had been underlined in red. I'm not leaving because I lost. I'm leaving because I refuse to raise my son in a place where justice wears a badge and not a conscience. He sat back, the weight of it pressed into his chest. Across the city, inside the cramped living room of the Sunset Grove apartment, Ethan sat with a blanket around his shoulders. Mason had fallen asleep early. Leo was building something out of tape and juice boxes. Nora watched them from the couch, knitting paused on her lap. Bah, Ethan asked quietly. Did Mom really work at Orion Tech? Nora didn't look up at first. Then she folded her knitting into her lap. She did. What happened? A pause. Then they pushed her out, quietly. She didn't scream, didn't sue, but it broke something in her. Ethan looked down. The man who runs it now, he said. The one I've been helping. Was he there? Yes. He turned his face toward the window. The night was thick. No stars. I didn't know. I know, Nora said gently. But even if you had, would you have stopped? He didn't answer. Lily's not the one who hurt your mother, she added. She's just a little girl trying to speak. He exhaled, a long, quiet sound. Then that's the only voice I need to hear. But the night wasn't done with either of them, because in the early hours of the next morning, when Jack unlocked the therapy room, he found it empty. The paper cranes on the windowsill were untouched, the crayons hadn't been moved, and on the desk was a single note, folded once, resting under a paperweight shaped like a compass. It read, I need to think. I'm not sure I should stay. Jack stood still for a long time. He didn't sit, didn't speak, just let the silence return to the room that had once echoed with laughter and now held only absence. The third morning without Ethan began quietly. Jack stood by the therapy room door, coffee growing cold in his hand. Inside, Lily sat in her usual spot on the rug, but her hands were still. No drawings, no whispered words, just the same absent gaze she'd carried months ago. Jessica knelt beside the girl, her tone soft, coaxing. Do you want the lion stickers again, or maybe the alphabet cards? Lily didn't react. Jack didn't say it aloud, but Jessica knew. The progress they'd made it had stalled. Later that morning, as Jack scrolled through reports on his office screen, Brian stepped in without knocking. The old driver, always quiet, held a yellowed envelope. I kept this, he said simply, placing it gently on Jack's desk. I thought you should see it. Inside was a photo. Helen Clark, perhaps 27, stood beaming among 5 other young engineers, all in Orion Tech vests, holding early prototypes of what would later become the company's first AI-assisted tablet. Jack blinked. He hadn't seen her smile like that in person. Not back then. Back then, she was just a name in HR briefings, someone too idealistic, too loud. Brian cleared his throat. She once vouched for me when I screwed up payroll. Would have been fired. She said people deserve second chances, even if they mess up quietly. Jack didn't reply, but his thumb stayed pressed against the edge of the photo long after Brian left. That afternoon, without a word to his board, Jack drove alone to Lincoln Elementary. The school was old, bricks faded, the playground fence bent in 3 places. He asked to speak to the principal. He didn't explain much, just signed the forms for a discretionary grant, a significant sum, enough for speech programs, special ed equipment, and an after-school club no attribution required. When asked for a statement, he shook his head. Just something overdue. He left before they could ask more. Across the city. Jessica took the bus to Sunset Grove. She didn't wear her Orion Tech badge. She didn't drive the company car. She brought a plain paper bag to Nora's apartment and waited outside the door. Nora opened it cautiously. Jessica gave a quiet smile. "No need to invite me in," she said. "I just wanted to leave this." Nora looked into the bag bottles of arthritis medication, a box of protein-rich groceries, and a neatly folded packet with the brochure for a summer education camp for gifted students. A handwritten note was clipped to it, full scholarship reserved for Ethan Rivera. No publicity, no conditions. Jessica hesitated. He doesn't need to know where it came from, but I thought, maybe you should know someone's trying. Nora's lips parted, but the words didn't come. Jessica only added, not out of guilt, just out of finally seeing what's real. She turned to leave, but Nora's voice stopped her. "He was hurt, you know," the old woman said, "by the way his mom was treated. But that boy never learned to hate, just learned to be quiet." Jessica didn't respond, but the sting in her eyes said she heard it all. That evening, as the light softened over Sunset Grove, Nora opened the bag again. Tucked inside the medicine pouch was a small card, unmarked by title or letterhead. It read, "I'm not sorry. I'm just trying to return what was taken." She sat quietly with the note resting in her lap, and somewhere not far from there, Ethan stood by his apartment window, staring out at the fading sky, unaware of what had arrived or what was finally starting to shift behind him. The sky over Forest Hills was a soft gray that morning, light stretching low between the trees. Jack hadn't opened the therapy room yet. He wasn't sure there'd be a reason to. Then came the knock. Not loud, just 2 taps. Steady. He opened the door. Ethan stood there, holding nothing but his worn-out notebook. His hair still curled a bit at the ends. No brothers beside him this time. Just him. They didn't say anything. Jack only stepped aside. In the therapy room, Lily was already there, fiddling with the edge of a sticker sheet. She looked up, her eyes locked onto Ethan's, and something unspoken passed between them. She didn't hesitate. She stood, crossed the room, and placed her tiny hand into his. He opened his palm. She traced the sign slowly. 1 curve, 1 tap. Her eyes never blinked. Ethan smiled. She said, "Friend." Jessica gasped behind him. Jack couldn't stay. He turned away and left the room. The rest of the day passed quiet. Lily spoke no more, but she stayed close to Ethan, holding onto his wrist as they painted, her movements steady, like she finally understood that the silence between them didn't have to mean loneliness. That evening, the air outside the house held a gentle chill. Jack brought out 2 wooden chairs to the porch. Ethan sat without being asked. No cushion, no sweater, just stillness. They watched dusk roll in like fog. Jack broke it first. "Your mom was right," he said softly. "About me, about silence. I was afraid to choose sides, so I stayed out of it. That was a choice too." Ethan didn't turn. I know. A pause, full of the kind that doesn't need filling. "I didn't come back for you," Ethan said. "I came for her, because she still looks for someone who listens. I think maybe I understand that now." Jack nodded. "You're more like your mother than you think." Ethan rubbed the edge of his notebook with his thumb. "She used to say, Silence is the slowest way to give up on something. You don't even notice you're backing away until it's too far. The porch creaked under Jack's shift of weight. I thought doing nothing would mean I didn't do harm. Ethan looked down the path that led to the driveway. Sometimes not stopping something is just as loud. Another stretch of quiet settled between them. Then, almost as an afterthought, Ethan added, "I'm not forgiving you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I don't want to carry it, either. That weight." Jack didn't try to answer. Inside, a soft thud echoed down the hall, then quick footsteps. Lily appeared at the door, pajama top askew, curls bouncing. She stared at Ethan, her lips parted. One word came out, shaky, but clear. "Ethan." He turned slowly. She was already running toward him. The morning of the launch was windless. The street outside the North Beach Community Hall was quiet, the kind of quiet that made small footsteps sound important. Inside, the air buzzed, not with noise, but with anticipation. The sign above the entrance read, in gentle letters, "Lily House, a place to listen." Jack stood at the back, straightening a stack of printouts. His suit wasn't new, but pressed. His fingers kept brushing the edge of the table, not nervous, just trying to stay still. Across the room, Ethan crouched beside a little boy in a wheelchair, showing him how to fold paper into a bird. Mason was handing out crayons to a row of kids. Leo was already covered in marker ink, grinning. They were loud and messy, and nothing about them looked official. But that didn't matter. That was the point. Jessica arrived just before the event started, with Lily holding tightly to her hand. The girl wore a simple dress, her curls pulled back. She saw Ethan and broke into a run. He knelt instinctively, catching her, their foreheads brushing. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The audience wasn't big, some parents, a few teachers, a couple reporters. Brian sat in the front row, arms folded like a proud uncle. No corporate banners, no slogans, just folding chairs and stories waiting to be told. When the time came, Ethan stepped onto the small wooden stage. His voice was steady. "We're not doctors," he said. "We're not here to fix anyone. We just know how it feels to be unheard. And we don't want anyone growing up thinking that silence means they don't belong." He didn't read from a script. He didn't need applause. When he stepped down, Lily tugged his sleeve and pointed to a girl standing alone at the edge of the room. The girl asked quietly, "Mr. Ethan, if I can't talk yet, am I still a student?" Ethan crouched down to her level. His smile didn't rush. "You're already the best listener here," he said. That was when Jack finally breathed out. He stepped outside for a moment, the city pressing close but not crowding. Helen used to live 4 blocks away from here. He remembered that now, or maybe he'd buried it for years, and the memory had simply found a way back. Inside, the children were forming a circle. One was teaching another how to use hand signs. Another was painting a board with the words, "This room listens." Lily was in the middle, eyes bright, laughing soundless, but unmistakable. Jessica joined him at the doorway. "She's changed," he said, without looking at her. "She's been seen," Jessica replied. Jack looked down at the folder in his hand. Inside were funding documents, new hires, plans for expansion, but none of that felt as heavy as the question that had settled in his chest. "If Helen were still here," he said quietly, "do you think she'd forgive me?" Jessica didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I think she'd be proud, not of the company, of Ethan." Jack nodded once. Then his eye caught something near the entrance. A white envelope, no name, just 6 words, penned neatly on the front, to the one who once walked away, but came back. Saturday mornings at Lily House carried a gentler rhythm. No bells, no rush, just light coming through tall windows and the soft rustle of markers across paper. The children scattered in small groups, working on communication through colors, signs, and expressions. Some drew families, others copied emotions from flashcards. No one was asked to speak unless they wanted to. Ethan sat cross-legged near the corner, Lily by his side. She was focused, her small hand tracing circles blue, yellow, red on thick cardstock every few strokes. She glanced up at him, as if seeking silent approval. A new boy, about 5, wandered across the room. He had just joined the program that week, curious, easily startled, but quick to smile. As he spotted Ethan, his face lit up. Without warning, he ran forward and threw his arms around Ethan's leg. Then he looked up and said it. Dad. The word hung in the air like a dropped glass. Several children paused mid-drawing. Jessica froze in the middle of unpacking Play-Doh. Even Mason and Leo across the room turned instinctively. Ethan looked down, and for a brief second, something flickered in his face, a mix of surprise and something heavier, older. He didn't correct the boy right away. Instead, he crouched slowly, touched the child's arm, and said, softly, I'm not your dad, buddy, but I can play with you, if that's okay. The boy nodded, already distracted by the markers. He sat beside Lily and began copying her shapes. Jack had been watching from the hallway. He hadn't intended to linger, but when the word was said, when he saw how Ethan responded, without a trace of embarrassment or discomfort, he didn't move. Something in his chest tightened, slow and unfamiliar. It wasn't jealousy. It was the absence of something he couldn't name. That night, back at home, Jack walked into the study. It was the first time in years he'd opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Dust lined the brass handle. Inside were old cards, birthday ones he'd never had the nerve to send after Helen left the company. He had kept them, year after year, unsigned, unwritten, unopened. At the very bottom, one envelope stood apart. The handwriting was unmistakable. Helen's. It had been sent shortly after her resignation. Jack had never read it. He didn't remember why. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he thought he'd read it later, when it hurt less. His fingers trembled as he opened it. It wasn't long, just a single page. I didn't need you to stand up for me, Jack. I needed you to stop what you knew was wrong. I needed you to recognize silence not as safety, but as surrender. If you couldn't do it for me, maybe someday. Do it for the child you'll have if you're ever lucky enough to know what that kind of love feels like. Jack sat down slowly. He didn't cry, but he didn't move for a long time. Across town, at the community center, Lily was finishing a new drawing. Ethan had helped her with the outlines, but she chose the colors. 3 stick figures held hands, one tall, one medium, one small. Underneath, in large, uneven letters, she'd written Dad, Ethan, me. She gave it to Ethan, who blinked, then smiled and passed it to Jack without a word. Jack held the paper like it was more fragile than it looked. That night, in his home office, Jack placed Helen's letter on his desk. Beside it, carefully, he laid the drawing. For the first time, he let them lie there side by side, 2 voices from 2 different times, both asking the same thing in their own way, and this time, he didn't look away. The article hit Monday morning, a full spread in the San Francisco Chronicle, titled Silent Voices, Loud Impact, a photo of Lily House, front and center, with Ethan crouched beside a girl holding a picture book. The story praised the program's radical empathy-based approach to nonverbal communication. Jessica had expected pride, Jack had expected scrutiny. What came was both. By mid-morning, the Orion Tech executive group thread lit up. One message after another buzzed Jack's phone as he sat in his office. Need to talk today. Urgent. Jack, this is spiraling. At noon sharp, the board convened. The main conference room was glass-walled and high-ceilinged, with a skyline view that usually impressed visiting partners. Today it felt like a cage. 13 people, most in dark suits. Few with open minds. They didn't waste time. We've received inquiries, said Mr. Halverson, CFO, legal risk, PR ambiguity. You bypassed review protocols when launching the Lily House pilot under Orion Tech's name. Jack didn't flinch. It wasn't about bypassing. It was about responding. Fast. And who authorized employing minors without licenses to work with children requiring certified therapeutic intervention? They're not employees, Jack said calmly. They're mentors, and they're supervised. That's semantics. Jack stood up. What Lily needed didn't come with a degree. It came with time, attention, kindness. These kids gave her that. Ms. Tisdale, in marketing, leaned in. We admire the mission, Jack, but you're making decisions that tie the company to your personal values. This isn't scalable. Jack looked at them all, his peers, his co-builders, his fence-sitters. He said, we've spent millions building platforms that analyze speech. But I watched a girl who couldn't speak reach out, trust, and laugh because someone sat with her, not above her. That's not personal sentiment. That's impact. There was a pause. Then Mr. Halverson spoke again. Cooler this time. We're asking you to make a choice. Do you want to be a philanthropist, or do you want to remain CEO of a Fortune 500 company? Jack didn't blink. I don't accept that choice, he said. I'll build a space where both can coexist. Silence followed, thick, unsettled. They moved on. Agenda items continued. No one returned to the topic, but the air stayed charged. That night, Jack worked late. Everyone had left the floor hours earlier, but he sat under fluorescent lights, rereading contracts and advisory memos like they were threats in disguise. His inbox pinged. An anonymous sender, no subject. He clicked. The message was short. They won't let this pass. You'll be forced to pick between your shares and your soul. No signature, just the echo of a warning. Jack leaned back in his chair. The light from the street cast a long reflection across the polished table. In the corner of the desk sat Lily's drawing. Next to it, Helen's letter. He placed his palm on both papers, side by side. Not everything worth doing came with applause, and not everything lost was meant to stay buried. The old Rivera warehouse had once echoed with the sound of loading pallets and forklift horns. Now, it pulsed with voices, laughter, and the quiet warmth of folding chairs being arranged under soft, golden lights. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in corners. Tonight, the newly renamed Rivera Community Arts Center was dressed not in metal and crates, but in canvas banners painted by children. Among them hung one that caught every eye, a hand-painted mural by Lily, titled The Bridge. It showed two halves of a world on one side, gray skyscrapers shadowed by clouds. On the other, a sunlit field with trees and children running across a park. In the middle, three figures stood holding hands, a boy, a girl, and a man. Beneath it, in Lily's uneven letters, read to those who waited and those who finally came. The event had no red carpet, no camera crews just folding seats, sandwiches on paper plates, and a few local reporters scribbling with more curiosity than expectation. But it was full, and still, it felt quiet, like everyone knew not to speak too loudly over what this night stood for. Jack sat in the third row, near the aisle, no assistant beside him, no spotlight, just his own breath and a stillness he hadn't known how to find before. Jessica sat a seat away, her clipboard tucked under her arm for once. Brian leaned against the back wall near the soundboard, sleeves rolled up, smile quiet. When Ethan's name was called, there was a moment where he didn't move. Mason nudged him. Leo whispered something only he could hear. Then Ethan stood. The vest was slightly too wide at the shoulders, the pants an inch too long. But he walked up steady, hands at his side, eyes focused. He didn't read from paper. He simply said, I used to think being quiet meant I had nothing to give, but I know now no one's truly silent, if someone's willing to listen. It wasn't loud or rehearsed, but the way he looked at the rows of kids seated near the stage, some rocking gently, some drawing, some clapping out of rhythm, it landed deeper than any speech could. Applause followed, not explosive, but steady. People rose, slowly, like waking from something heavy. Behind him, Lily stood beside her mural. She didn't wave. She just smiled. Ethan walked down. A woman from the committee placed the plaque in his hands. He turned, nodded, then stepped aside. No photos, no pose, just space enough for what had been said to settle. Back in his seat, Jack looked at the mural again, then at Ethan, then at Lily. He didn't clap. He didn't move. He just let the feeling hold him. Jessica leaned close, voice barely a whisper. The boy outgrew everything we expected. Brian, from his corner, nodded. And Jack finally learned how to step back so something right could happen. Later, when most of the guests had left, Jack stayed behind. Folded chairs scraped softly against the floor. Balloons deflated in the corners. The janitor turned off the stage lights, one switch at a time. Jack knelt to help a volunteer untangle some string lights. A small voice piped up from behind a stack of art folders. "Sir, are you the man who made this place?" Jack turned. A girl, maybe 7, with frizzy hair and big glasses, stood holding a notebook. He crouched, eye level. "I'm just someone," he said softly, who learned to listen a little later than he should have. She nodded like she understood more than she let on, then ran off to chase her brother down the hall. Jack stood there, eyes on the place where she had stood, as if waiting for an answer he already knew. The sun leaned low over the city, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of Lily House's backyard. Someone had drawn a winding trail of chalk flowers and suns, and children followed it barefoot, dust on their heels, laughter breaking the warm hush of dusk. The fence had paper lanterns strung along it, gently swaying. A folding table groaned under trays of cookies, some uneven, some burnt, but all proudly made by the hands of the parents inside the open kitchen. Jack stood near that table, wearing a flour-dusted apron and holding a tray like he'd been doing it for years. A volunteer passing by chuckled, "Baking now." "Huh, what's your title?" "Chief Cookie Officer." Jack smiled without looking up. "I just do what my daughter tells me." On the patch of grass that served as their stage, a group of kids stood in a loose row, ready to perform. No microphone, no curtains, just the softness of shared space. They began to move. Their arms, hands, and fingers floated in synchronized signs. A silent song, full of rhythm and meaning. Some moved with practiced grace. Others hesitated, peeked at their peers, then caught back up. Lily was in front, her expression calm, her gestures sure. Ethan stood in the audience, his shoulders relaxed, a hand in his pocket. He didn't blink much, just watched, beside him. Jack stayed a few paces back, not intruding, not anymore. He leaned lightly against the tree near the edge of the yard. From here, he could see all of it. Children connecting without words, adults supporting without orders, Ethan standing steady without being asked. The performance ended in soft applause and a few happy squeals. Lily ran straight to Ethan. He knelt to meet her, and she threw her arms around his neck. Jack didn't step in. He didn't need to. Jessica approached quietly, holding an envelope in her hand. She looked at Jack, something unreadable in her eyes. "This was sent to the old Orion Tech office," she said. "Found its way back here last week." She handed it over. Jack didn't recognize the return address, but when he opened it, his fingers paused. The handwriting was unmistakable. Helen. Inside was a single photo. Lily, barely a toddler, sitting in a stroller, holding a red toy truck. Her cheeks were round, her hair wild, her mouth curved in a curious half-smile. On the back, a line in blue ink. "If one day she smiles again, remember it's not because you fixed everything, it's because you stayed." Jack's breath caught. He folded the photo, careful not to crease the words. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He walked back toward the folding table and placed the letter in the donation jar, safe. Quiet. Present. Later that evening, as twilight wrapped itself around the yard and families began to leave, a few children stayed behind to help clean up. Someone turned on a string of soft garden lights. The chalk drawings blurred under tired footsteps. Lily sat beside Ethan, their legs swinging off the edge of the small stage. She looked up, signed something slowly. Ethan nodded. Jessica stood with Brian near the kitchen, watching them all. "They're not the same," she said. "No." Brian agreed. "But maybe that's the point." Jack joined them, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. No speech, no announcement, just presence. The three of them stood in a quiet triangle, watching children dance with their shadows. Parents sip coffee on the porch, someone humming faintly in the kitchen. There were no fireworks, no final scene, only a sense that something had settled, something had held. They didn't need to be the same to belong. They just had to face the same way, towards something better. The last cookie tray sat untouched on the corner table, still warm from a hand that no longer needed recognition. Outside, chalk drawings faded under the breeze, names, bridges, stars like soft echoes of a day that mattered in small, quiet ways. No one made a speech, no music played, just the rustle of jackets, the hum of cleanup, and a few kids who didn't want to leave yet. Maybe that's the measure of change, not in what's rebuilt, but in who chooses to stay behind and sweep the floor. And maybe that's where a new kind of belonging begins.